What advice would you today give your 16-year-old self? That's a question I have asked to many of my coaching clients through the years, and I find it a very valuable question to ask today. So just take a minute right now and think in your own mind, what advice would you give to your 16-year-old self? If you could talk to your 16-year-old self, what would you say to them? Just take a minute to think about that. Well, here's what I would say to my 16-year-old self. I would say, kid, you are in for one hell of a ride. Developing your spiritual life will be a lifeline. Don't worry so much what other people think. You'll have numerous careers and job titles that don't exist now. Don't get too worried about the exact path. You'll be called to service. If I told you how it would play out, you wouldn't believe me. Life will be unpredictable. You must prepare for the moments that present themselves, but you can't control them. Build strong friendship bonds. Stay connected to your family. Most important, trust God. God loves you and has a plan for you. You are courageous. I don't know how your message to your 16-year-old self sounded, but my overall theme was all we can really do in our lives is to prepare our inner life to make the best decisions and react to situations that we cannot imagine. We have little control over everything else. Our lives in this world are uncertain. We can only control how we respond. I'll be curious if anybody will be open to sharing what advice you gave yourself to your 16-year-old self. And that's the advice I gave to my 16-year-old self is the advice I give to a lot of young people who are really stressed out, particularly now. Life won't unfold exactly as you think or want. So build the bonds of community, friendships, and your faith. Certainty about the future is an illusion. You think you know, but you don't. We are living in a moment of incredible uncertainty, making clear to all of us that our desire to be in control and remain certain is an illusion. We seek certainty because it gives us a sense of safety. If I know what's going to happen, I can prepare. The connection between certainty and safety is hammered into us at an early age. We're taught when we're little, right? Get control of your lives by the adults and follow the rules, get a good education, find the right spouse, and make money. If we do that, we're told, we can guarantee safety. But we're not taught very often the most important truth, that certainty is an illusion. Our pursuit of this illusion leads us to worry about futures that we imagine that never happen, and we're surprised by what does. Another coaching exercise I've used with clients is asking them to write down exactly what will happen a week from today. From beginning to end, fill out the whole day and write what's going to happen. And it turns out when you do that exercise that nobody gets it exactly right. And what that teaches us is that we cannot even describe with certainty our own life just a week away. Why in the world do we think we have control over future global events in our mind? We should pause when we find ourselves stressed out because of the future that we imagine is very possibly not likely. In this moment, there's a lot of predictions about our nation's future, and those are yielding a lot of anxiety. Yet, when we look back, we see there are so many predictions that have gotten it all wrong. World War I was going to be the war to end all wars, followed by World War II. The booming economy of the 20s was predicted to never end until it was followed by a Great Depression. Richard Nixon's presidential landslide ensured Republicans would control politics for a generation until Watergate. Following the Kuwait War, George H.W. Bush, our president, had the highest approval rating of any president. He was a shoo-in for election until he was defeated by Bill Clinton. Barack Obama had put together the new powerhouse Democratic coalition that would swell in size for a generation, that would include immigrants, until a record number of immigrants voted Republican. At every turn, conventional wisdom was wrong, humbling us that we get it wrong and that the certain future that we're worrying about might never happen. So what can we control? In this week's column by my friend Pete Wehner in the New York Times, he quoted Václav Havel, who challenged the dictatorship in his country and is such a brilliant writer, philosopher, thinker. I love everything he says. But he had a great line that hope is a state of mind, not a state of the world. We don't get hope from current events. We get it from within ourselves. He goes on to say, hope is not the conviction. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, according to Havel. Certainly, that is something that makes sense. We can make sense of what happens. We can make sense of things regardless how it turns out, because that's how we react to it inside ourselves. Hope, properly understood, keeps us above water. It urges us to do good works even in hard times. I was also moved by this meme that's been circulating by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk. And he was asked, "Aren't you worried about the state of the world?" And he responded, "If I allowed myself to be impacted by the state of the world, I would have that anxiety fill my heart. If your heart is filled with anxiety, you'll get sick and you'll not be able to help others." What does it look like when people can keep their state of mind, even in challenging times? This past Friday, I provided my cultural translation training to 20 senior government leaders. Now, no group is more impacted by the uncertainty from the dramatic shift in our government with the new administration. And I wondered, would they have the bandwidth to embrace a training that stresses compassion and the ability to see the perspective of others? How they engaged me was truly amazing. I was struck by their commitment and call to public service and a practical desire to learn authentically to translate their portfolio to a new administration. There was calm in the storm of that room. They had recognition that they could do all they could do now is best prepare for a future they weren't sure about. Also, during the training, I reflected on myself. A big chunk of the training is based on things I learned 40 years ago in the midst of the AIDS crisis. And I was struck that a time of grief and uncertainty has transformed my life and much of what I teach today. The insights of Swedenborg have given me incredible reassurance in this moment. In his book, Divine Wisdom, he explains how the universe operates, basically. And he makes the case that God has a master plan for goodness and love in the world and works through human beings and events to move us in that direction. He says, quote, "Nothing is allowed that cannot be turned to good. Within our freedom, the dark forces can do their work, but only so far as God can bring cosmic good from it." He goes on to say that those who don't have any faith in the divine will see current events and ask, and listen to this question that they ask: where is God's working when evil people are promoted to higher office, when their efforts are rewarded more than those of good people? These faithless and irreverent leaders wreak harm, do damage, and seek to destroy faithful and reverent people, and sometimes even murder them with their vicious schemes. He adds, the people with the gift of God's presence in their life can have hope in challenging times. He writes, spiritually wise people think and speak differently. Even though they do not completely understand the ongoings of the workings of divine providence in their thoughts, or even see it with their eyes, they still know it and they acknowledge it. I find these insights extremely helpful. They support me in challenging times. They offer me a wider lens. He also writes, divine providence does not regard which so soon passes away and ends with a person's life in this world. It regards that which remains to eternity, that which has no end. We're only seeing a small part of a very larger story, and God is guiding that story. It reminds me of that classic passage from 1 Corinthians. It says, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as I am known." Now, it's important to make a distinction. God does not will bad events or evil. It's allowed to provide us the freedom to choose between good and evil. However, God works through all things, even evil people and evil events, to bring about good. Here again, I look at my life at 16. If you told me that the evil things that I would see, suffer, and the cruelty I'd face personally, I would ask God, please don't let this happen. How can a loving God allow this to happen? Only with looking backward can I see that those trials and tribulations in my life were the greatest defining spiritual moments of development of my soul for eternity. What seemed horrible in the moment, now I see as blessings that have made me more compassionate, more forgiving, calmer, and a deeper faith, all through the grace of God. We can't see the bigger picture unfolding in the moment, but we can trust that God, a loving God, is working in this world and through us and with us. We have an important role to play. The contemplative monk Thomas Merton gave this advice in times of turmoil, quote, "Someone has to try to keep his head clear of static and preserve the interior solitude and silence that are essential for independent thought. We prepare for uncertainty by increasing our inner solitude." In the short gospel story of Mary and Martha, which we read today, Mary sits at Jesus' feet, focusing on what she can learn. Martha is cleaning up the meals and she's getting frustrated. And finally she calls out to Jesus and says, "Tell Mary to help me out here." Jesus responds, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away." In times of crisis and uncertainty, we can get caught up in our daily activities and all the things that we're doing, and we can neglect the focus that we should have on God guiding our life, God's guidance. This past year, I've been working to improve my own inner life. We're working with a breath coach named George Ramsey, who lives in Asheville, North Carolina, not far from Sherry and Scott. He described in his newsletter this week the power of finding inner quiet in the midst of uncertainty of the storm, in this case, a literal hurricane called Helen. He writes, "There was a moment during the hurricane when I lost it. Some neighbors were saying we needed to leave. Others vowed to hunker down. Rumors of the dam breaking were passed down the street. There are no roads out, my neighbor told me. Panic set in. I was completely overwhelmed. Neighbors were asking me what I thought we should do, and I kept drawing blanks. I was overwhelmed and simultaneously empty, unable to make decisions. So I did what I do when I can't hear myself. I laid down and breathed. Using the 3-part breath, I moved my attention to the large ball of tension at the center of my chest. I breathed until I could download, as I downloaded from Spotify some playlists. I felt the tension get more intense, and for about 8 minutes, and then it released. I cried. I felt relieved. I felt like the breath was moving out of the sense of panic, both mine and my neighbors, and the lights came back on in my brain. After a good long practice, I started to feel myself again. I could feel grounded. I could feel my inner guidance system reloading. Hearing myself has been a challenge my entire life. It is easy for me to merge with the thoughts and the opinions of those around me, and it keeps me from hearing my own wants and desire. Breath work became a tool to help me get clear. I think that's an amazing story and an amazing tool. There are things we can do to navigate uncertainty. Breathing is one of them. So what can you do to navigate uncertainty? First, don't let yourself become overwhelmed by every current event. Instead, prepare yourself for what God is calling you to do in this time. This is a time for leadership for you and our community together. Develop your inner life through prayer, silence, and breathing, and coming to worship. Trust that the divine plan that you know is working within chaotic events is bringing about good. Realize that you may not be able to make sense of things until long after they happen. Remember in your own life the challenges that you have faced and that have given you the greatest transformations. Keep your hope alive so you can be of use to others who need your help. Remind yourself of the advice that you gave your 16-year-old self and give it to yourself now. I think this advice is good for all of us. Kid, you're in for one hell of a ride. Keep developing your spiritual life. It will be a lifeline. Don't worry what others think. You'll have numerous careers and job titles that don't exist. Don't get worried about the exact path. You'll be called to service. If I told you how it would play out, you wouldn't believe me. Life will be unpredictable. You must prepare for the moments as they present themselves, but you cannot control events. Build strong friendship bonds, stay connected to your family, and most important, trust God. God loves you and has a plan. You are courageous. Amen. And at this time, we open it up to any questions, comments, concerns, uncertainties. Quiet group today. Cooper has some ideas.
Hey, Rich, thanks so much. This is Ellie talking. I was wondering if, in addition to breathing, there are any techniques you know that kind of rely on embracing kind of the sensation of like love or like energy flowing in from the universe to kind of shore up these resources like you're talking about.
Yeah, I think breathing is a good tool just because it's what you do with that is for me, I wouldn't I do breathing, but I also play music with it, but also prayer for me. That's I operate more in that system where I'm actually asking for God's guidance and praying. So those are the ways that I would do it. If I'm really getting overwhelmed, exercise is also good for me. Going for walks. We talked in an earlier sermon about how Swedenborg went for walks and got his guidance from those walks. So I think some for some people it's more active. For other people it's more like yoga or meditation or breath work, prayer. But it's mainly anything that works for you to stop the getting caught up in the complete chaos of the moment and getting into that narrative. I keep saying on these services, please restrict your diet of cable networks. Interesting, a lot of folks do tell me afterward they disagree with that because that's where they get their news. But there's just so much coming at us, and it's an entertainment culture right now. So the entertainment culture is built on shocking you and shocking your system, and that actually is unhealthy for your system. So just be aware that these are entertainers, and they're trying to get your attention. So I think having a diet of less of that and taking it a little less seriously. I've got some issues around that myself. I read like 3 newspapers a day at least. I don't think I need to do that much, but I've definitely cut out like cable television and so forth because it's just can be overwhelming. Those are some of the things that I would do to enter it. I think also in the story that I shared with George Ramsey, what I thought was interesting in his story is that he felt his feelings and cried. I think allowing feelings to move through us is also very powerful. Just it's going to be different. It's going to be different for everyone. And I see Kai. You put some stuff in. Do you mind just saying, sharing with some of your strategies, Kai? Kai is from our St. Louis church, and he serves with me on general council of the denomination.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Hi, Rich.
Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that you had a service today. It's my first time, so I really enjoy your talk. Thank you. Yeah, I was saying that for me, actually, I walk my dogs every morning for 2 miles up in the hill it's quite strenuous, but it's okay. And then I find washing dishes surprisingly, and my wife loves this, cleaning houses, washing dishes. It really helped me to relieve my stress. And a lot of time, people, we have family gathering and people are talking and talking, but it's kind of stressful actually talking to me. It's a lot of time talking even with familiar people and try to think and talk. And then maybe arguing or debating with whatever value and ideas we have is stressful. And oftentimes I say, okay, keep going, and I'll just go to the kitchen and do all the cleanup. And that really relieve my stress. So my wife loves chanting. I'm not a good singer. I'm not a musician. But my wife loves singing and chanting. So thank you for letting me sharing this.
Well, yeah, just a quick question on that. One, I think that Martha could use your advice that when she was doing those dishes with Jesus, she could have chilled out a little bit. I'm curious, particularly for introverts, extroverts, do you think it's getting away from the crowd that is it's less the dishes and it's more like just getting away from all the impulse?
I think I'm inherently introvert,
Yeah.
but because of public life and survival and work and all that, I force myself to learn to be at least to socialize. I'm not saying that I learn to be an extrovert because you cannot learn that, but you could exercise some practices to embrace yourself and to reach out. But it always gives me butterfly,
Yeah.
in a social setting. And so yeah, so
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think beware of the inputs that are coming in, and when you're feeling uncertainty and overwhelm, and there's certain ways you can control that. I love that way you described it. So thank you for that, Kai.
thank you.
I know Malcolm has his hand up, but Ellie, I forgot to ask, did I answer your question properly? Because you always ask great questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was super helpful. I think the part I was imagining, I think you answered with like your relationship to prayer.
Yeah.
It's just something I've been thinking about, and like I'm training right now to become a therapist for context. But they teach a lot of the mindfulness stuff, like the breathing, but there's no prayer analog because it's not a spiritual, practice. So I've just been thinking more about ways to incorporate that aspect of it, where you're kind of receiving rather than just perceiving or accepting.
Yeah. So let me just say one more thing about that. And one other thing I've developed is sort of what kind of what I was reading from Swedenborg. I now do believe in providence in my life because I guess I'm older and I've seen the path, I've seen what it's done in my life, so I see how it works better. So, concrete example, this past week, the church found an ideal house to move into. It was great. It was perfect. The price was good, great location. We all, we imagined it. Ross ran across town to go look at it. Annabelle was in town, and we made an offer. And but the offer was contingent because we still haven't closed out the deal because of inspections with the church. But the thing is, so we didn't get the place because we of the contingency. They were like that, which is a pretty natural thing to be worried about. But I will say I just thought to myself, okay, there's something there. That wasn't the right one. There's something better. And I think that saying at least saying those things helps me a lot too. I've come to believe it, and I come to believe I can't just because I can't see it in the moment doesn't mean it's not happening. So that's just another thing. So thank you for that. And yeah, I think that the schools are teaching that are really missing something without the spiritual aspect by just breathing alone. So thank you for sharing your experience there. And I hope that Yale is treating you well. We miss you physically in this area, but we're glad you're here. Malcolm, you had your hand up.
Yes, well, like Reverend Pang, I find my daily walks to be a critical source of, of strength and maintaining balance. He mentioned washing dishes, and I always recall that George Dole said that his best ideas came to him while he was washing dishes. And finally, I find that music in times of stress and trouble are a great source of reassurance and consolation, including that lovely song that you played at the start of the service. Like Chris, somewhere in a place that I've lost track of, I have a vinyl recording of Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Yeah, music can be a great way. Walking, Malcolm has an amazing ritual of walking every day too. And I think we're hearing a message for Swedenborgians to get rid of their dishwashers today. Like everybody, unplug your dishwashers, give them away. We all have to go to washing dishes. There's something about washing dishes that Martha could have learned, but we're having a theme today that that's a new one for me. Cool, thank you for that. Anybody else with a comment or a thought how you would navigate uncertainty, or anybody with any sort of interesting feedback that you gave to your 16-year-old self based on what's going on in your life? And if anybody in the local congregation here wants to share, I will flip the laptop around.
I just have a small thing, but sometimes like what I'll tell my students is to make a list of what's in your control right now and what isn't. And if it's not in your control, then I think it helps a little bit.
That's great advice. What's in your control? And I'd say one thing I've just noticed is through my life is that very little is in our control. That's the surprising thing. I think we can control how we react to things, and we can improve ourselves and control that. But you know, I just look at all the plans everybody has had all throughout, and it, you know, who would have? We don't like to even remember this now, but who would have expected a pandemic and upend a whole world? And that was on nobody's bingo card, but who knows what other things could happen. So it's just a matter of how we react in those things. So I like that. Control versus not control. And it reminds me of the serenity prayer that's really popular, particularly in recovery groups, of, you know, give me the ability to know what I can change and what I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference is a really good one. So thank you for that. Appreciate that. Anybody else with a practice for uncertain times? Chris.
There we go. I have to tell you, 16 years old, my family had just moved to a new neighborhood in Detroit, and I was going to the high school that had been the rival of the high school in my old neighborhood. So, you know, friends I'd had for years, they're, you know, at the old high school, and I'm at the new one. And so I'm navigating my way through high schools in Detroit at that point were 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. So, you know, I'm navigating that wonderful world of being 15 and 16 and trying to figure out my place. And, you know, it occurs to me that I can't even articulate advice to give my 16-year-old self, because I had no idea from day to day what was going on, you know. And finally, I did get to a point, well, fortunately, thank you, Swedenborgian Church, because I had that place, which was kind of a touchstone, but I'm in a high school with 3,500 students in it, and I'm trying to find touchstones, you know. And so I'm looking here and I'm thinking, you know, what do I do? Well, oddly enough, this is so, you know, strange, but for many, many years, I loved riding my bike around my neighborhood. And I had this cute little, you know, when transistor radios came out, and had this cute little transistor radio. And I'm riding around my new neighborhood and realizing there are no people in this neighborhood riding bikes. And, you know, so, but it was the music that saved me, you know, really. I mean, I'm listening to the radio And I finally figured out that if I just sat down somewhere and there was a little park nearby, and I see my sister here, and yes, it was Stopel Park. But, I sat down and I just listened to my little tiny radio, all those tinny little notes, but it was just the best thing. And that began a practice of using music as, my thing. But what am I going to tell myself? Because I still don't know where I'm going, what I'm going to do, and so on. And so, honestly, if I were to tell my 16-year-old self anything, it would be that it is going to be all right. You have no clue what's happening, but it will be fine. And behind it, there's a little Bach and Beethoven, and as well as Simon and Garfunkel, and so on, and it is strange to think about what I would have told myself. I probably would have also told myself, just for, this is like too much information for everybody, but I would have told myself, don't be a 16-year-old in a new high school and end up being the current date of somebody who's a senior, because it screws up your whole connection. But anyway, that's it for me.
I love it. I think yeah, think about how intense the dating world is, and every rises and falls on that. But I like the theme I'm hearing about music, exercise, getting out and biking, and
Yeah,
having having some touchstone. I think one of the things that's missing for a rising generation is there's not a lot of touchstones. They were kind of taught that everything should be very practical and transactional. So like joining
yeah,
a group and becoming friends with people and attending a church, like what do I get out of it? Like what do I get out of it? And is it worth my time? And I think it's, yeah, you got to invest in that, because there's certain things you have to invest in. Beautifully said, Chris.
Yeah, I was gonna go to music.
I have a question
Yes.
for Chris. Hey, did you mention Stopel Park?
yeah.
Stoepel
Rosedale Park in Detroit.
in Detroit Coast? Yeah, actually, my wife actually grew up there.
No kidding.
And she said it's the first time she's actually with me listening. But she said that it's the first time in her life that someone mentioned that place.
Well, it was not too far away from where we lived, and if you talk to my sister, she'll tell you it was the worst place in the world when she experienced her first attack of food poisoning with fish. That's
Yeah,
Dory over there in the picture that you can see that says Glenn and Dory. Yeah,
yeah.
but
Your family moved to Westland, right?
But did you do you know Minnock Street? Minock?
I do not know.
Yeah, that was the street. I think it went right into Stopel Park. But anyway,
Okay.
and in the Flintstones, right? Didn't they have a Flintstone?
Yeah, well, and we lived in an area called it was South Rosedale Park,
Yeah.
and we lived on a street called Granville, and it was just a ride away, but it was a nice ride, but it was one of the last few rides I ever took on the bike.
Mm,
I
okay.
love all these. I love all these connections. I love the connections.
Don't you love it?
I love,
Yeah, thank you. I just was shocked when you said
That's okay.
Stopel
I mean, like, how many people know a name like Stopel Park?
Park. Right, exactly.
excellent. Anybody else with a question or thought or concern or comment, an insight, advice to your 16-year-old self? Well, good. Well, folks, let's all hang in there with these times of it can be very chaotic, and let's
Yeah.
hang together.
Rich, may I just share one last moment? May I just share something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing that I would like to share with everyone is that I remember a few years ago when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was interviewed on BBC. And this is what she said. This was in 2017. She said that at that time, we're not experiencing the best of times, but I'm optimistic that in the long run, and a great man once said that the true symbol of the United States is not the bald eagle, it is the pendulum. And she further explained that when the nation's political spectrum veer too far in one direction, it will inevitably swing back, ultimately settling in a balanced center. So for me, I find that just, after the elections, I kind of, obviously everyone, were very stressful, and just remembering what she said, and gave me some hope, and that I hold on to the hope that her words will resonate in our current times as well. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Rich, I'll give you one more thought about my 16-year-old. It was probably about 16 when in gym, my least favorite high school class, I managed to score a basket for the opposing team. And my advice would be that was not the end of the world.
Yeah, but it sure felt like it then. And that's the beauty of that we get from retrospect. We can look at it and we can laugh at it, but it wasn't really laughable in the moment. And so whatever in the moment doesn't feel laughable, in retrospect, it very likely will, and could be very powerful. So thank you all. Thank you for sharing your personal stories and your insights and your strategies. We're in this together, and we will move through challenging times together. So thank you. I really appreciate that. All right.